chapter of Sarawat. Very much, Hanan. Sorry, let me just get this mask thing is still new somehow. But hello, everyone. Oh my gosh, we are back. How amazing is this? It's been a very, very long time for the Sarawat community to meet in person. And it's really, I appreciate that everybody has braved a pandemic, or as Boris Johnson would term it, an endemic, as well as almost a check-in terminal to come to Expo. So thank you so much for everyone for being here. And of course, I'd like to welcome everyone who's joining us online, because obviously this is a hybrid event. So hopefully we will get some questions and comments as well from our online community. So what are we doing today? First of all, it's really a pleasure to do this in collaboration with Hanan and her team at Société Générale, because they, first of all, got us this space, which I think is quite amazing. And second of all, we really agree that the future conversation in the private sector has to revolve around questions of responsibility. How do we marry responsibility and our own interests of growth and expansion of our companies? So I think that's really the topic of today, is going to revolve around a question of understanding sustainability. What does it mean to us? What does it mean to the companies that we run? What does it mean to the people that we work with? And hopefully my personal goal would be that we have a better understanding what sustainability means, that we have a bit of a personal reflection perhaps of what this topic means to us as an organization or as owners. And ideally, we all walk away with 1 or 2 points that we can concretely implement in our own day-to-day to make a difference for tomorrow. Before I deep dive into our session, I'd like to announce that Sarawat yesterday has opened a partnership with the Rostamani Group, so who are also members in Sarawat. And I'm so excited that the next 6 months, we're going to spend reflecting on the relationship between climate change and family business. And I'm very, very happy that we get to do that in collaboration with a family business, because the depth of concern that this family has shown about this topic, this particular topic, with relation to the businesses that they are in themselves, is astounding. And hopefully all of us will be part of this dialogue and conversation for the future as well. So if you have any thoughts, any ideas, hopefully this session will trigger a little bit of reflection as well. Maybe you can share them with us and we can incorporate them into our reflections over the next 6 months. So what are we doing today? We have a very interesting packed schedule. We have a hybrid schedule. So you'll have 2 speakers online and 2 speakers who are here with us in person. So please bear with us if there are glitches and issues. There should not be, you guys know us. But if there are, we appreciate your support and your indulgence. We'll start off with a policy outlook. So we wanted to start off with a big picture idea of what is going on in the world. Then we are going to narrow down with a session by Samar, who is going to highlight the questions of sustainability. So really much more specific and a bit more technical. Then we are going to have a panel discussion, and that's really the heart of our session today, is going to be our panel discussion, where we will have a debate about the questions around family business and sustainability in the future. After the coffee break, we will have another short keynote presentation, really going into the technical questions. So what now? How can we make a difference and yet make sure that our companies thrive and become better organizations? And hopefully this last session will spark a debate. I know most of you here, I know you all have very strong opinions. So I'd love for you to start getting them ready so that we can share them with each other. And the idea is that by the end of the session, we will summarize some of the thoughts that have been created here today. Okay. It's 2 years. It's been 2 years, guys, okay? Indulge me. So the thoughts that have been created here today, and we will send them to you for further reflection. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Obviously, it is your session. It's your opportunity to connect with each other and also to tell us your thoughts on this topic. So without any further ado, I'd like to hand over to Hanan to introduce our first Zoom speaker. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Farida. Thank you. So now I'm very happy to have my colleague Michala Marcussen from Société Générale Paris. Michala is the group chief economist. So it's a pleasure to have her with us. With Michala, we will take a look at where the global economy stands today and consider the implication of the accelerating green transition for the global economy. Michala, welcome.
So thank you very much. And it's a real pleasure to be here today, even though sadly the circumstances are such that it must be in a virtual format, at least for my side today. When I look at the global economy today, what really strikes me about this crisis is just how unprecedented it has been. Its cause, the speed at which it's happened, the amplitude, but I think also very importantly, the policy response that came with this crisis. Now, as we look ahead to our session today, I thought I'd like to focus in particular, just giving you a few thoughts on where the global economy stands today, and zoom in on that question of inflation. Indeed, it's the hot topic of the day as far as economics goes. Will we or will we not have structurally higher inflation? Next, I'd like to share a few thoughts with you on what I really see as an accelerating factor that's emerging from this crisis. It's true in many areas. We see more working from home. We also see an acceleration of the digital transition, but in particular, we really see this acceleration of the climate transition. But let's just come back to the current situation and where we stand today. Indeed, sadly, the pandemic is still with us, but what we've seen is that policymakers, businesses, and households have become far better at learning to adapt to this situation. Indeed, if we just look back to the first lockdowns that we experienced here in Europe, they were really very much blanket lockdowns that shut down significant chunks of the entire economy. What we've seen with the subsequent social distancing and lockdown measures is that these have been able to be more targeted and more localized. Just as an example, much of the construction sector was closed during the first lockdown. This has not been the case in subsequent lockdowns. So the fact that we've become much better at targeting really means that the economic consequences, while still very serious, have become lesser over time from the various social distancing measure and lockdowns. And I think this is very important. And I also think it shows us an amazing ability to adapt. I'm just thinking of my local neighborhood here in Paris. Some of the small businesses around me, local shops and restaurants that previously were not really using digital services have begun to do so during the crisis. And I think we should see this as a testament to the adaptability of our economy, and also something that gives me some optimism when I look ahead to the climate transition that we face in the coming years. Now, when we look to the pandemic today, one of the real challenges for me as an economist is getting to grip with exactly where we stand in the global economy. Indeed, we see the very many frictions that this pandemic has brought, be it on the global supply chain. We see this throughout various aspects of the supply chain, but also on the demand side. Just imagine the situation. This crisis struck the world economy at the same time, and at the same time, we all rushed out to buy many of the same goods at the global level. At the same time, there are other goods that we altogether stopped demanding at the same time, and likewise, several services that ground to a halt. So when you think about this impact, it's no surprise that we've seen this very substantial friction on the supply chain as production chains were hit, but also on the demand side in that significant volatility of the demand. Now, when we look at the economic data, the survey data, the labor market data, we see these effects on the data, but perhaps the area that's really received the most attention in the press is the impact of all of these combined frictions on inflation. Indeed, we saw the spectacular headline that US inflation has now hit 7% year on year in December. But let's just break down these effects into a little more detail. Now, of course, top of the list, we all know these supply side frictions, commodity prices, stoppages in key parts of the supply chain, transportation bottlenecks, and of course, also labor market frictions. Just think about the US and just think about a labor market where very many people were let go during the pandemic. And now they're trying to rehire many of these people simultaneously. And I think it's this idea I want to share with you today, this simultaneous stop and go, which has really induced a lot of this volatility that we see globally. Now, energy, of course, is a particular situation, but here again, we've also seen prices climb. And I'll come back a little bit later on to energy prices in relation to the climate transition. Now, of course, for businesses, these numerous frictions on the supply side, as I say, have been aggravated by volatility on the demand side. And this again has been true, especially in the US, where fiscal policy measures were exceptionally large. In fact, when we look at the US fiscal policy measures, they really provoked a positive contribution to household income, whereas what we saw in the euro area was that the fiscal policy measures tended more to protect incomes rather than outright boost them. Now, with the key role of the US consumer in the global economy, it's just hardly surprising that this combination of factor on the supply side, on the demand side, add to that the fiscal policy, that we see this very high inflation in the US. Indeed, if we just strip out the impact of the food and the energy prices, I think it's interesting to note that the core inflation in the US stood at 5.5% year on year in December, but the same measure in the euro area stood at just 2.6%. Now, this is still a high number for the euro area, but you can appreciate that cross-Atlantic gap that to our minds, to a large extent, reflects the very different fiscal policy measures. Now, I just wanted to finally, on the inflation front, mention a few technical factors that have also played in. And just zoom in, I'll just take as an example the German VAT cut. This was put in place in the second half of 2020. It was normalized again in 2021, but we still have those base effects feeding through and lifting the inflation numbers. Now, that effect will fade out in January. And indeed, some of the base effects from the very low prices we saw at the early stages of the pandemic will fade out. So combined, I do expect to see inflation beginning to head down. The other key factor to keep in mind on the demand side is that this year, we're not seeing that same fiscal stimulus come through. In fact, we have a fiscal stance that's turning to tightening. Now, some of that tightening effect will be offset by the fact that more of the economies will again be open, but that net, we still see it as a tightening effect, and especially in the US. And for example, just another thing to keep in mind when we think about the US is that the moratorium on student loans is now due to end on the 1st of May. So again, it has a tightening effect. So combining all these factors, I do see inflation slowing. And of course, the final element on the inflation picture is that I believe that central banks stand ready to tame those inflation expectations. So our forecast is that inflation will remain quite high in the early months of this year, and then gradually come down in the course of the year. But of course, when we look ahead, there's also a longer term debate on inflation, and in particular on whether the climate transition could drive structurally higher inflation. It's easy to see the arguments as to why. Just think about what we've just talked about in relation to the pandemic. Significant shifts in supply chains, big shifts in transportation patterns, big changes in commodity demands, shifts in labor markets, and all of this potentially happening at significant speed if, as I believe, we're now seeing an acceleration of the climate transition. Now, I'll give you my basic view up front, and then I'll zoom in a little bit more on the factors. Indeed, my view is that as we look ahead to the climate transition, but also I would emphasize it's important to keep in mind the digital transition, when we're looking at the economic implications, I do see more volatility in the cycle ahead in the transition. Now, my baseline scenario is one of what I would qualify as a fairly orderly transition. There will be bumps in the road, but it's not one where I see structurally higher inflation in a kind of 1970s style replay on the inflation numbers. Rather, I see such an outcome of structurally much higher inflation as a risk scenario in the event of a disorderly transition. And I think this is really the scenario that we need to work to avoid. But let's look more closely at some of these arguments. Now, I think that one of the things that I already emphasized to you is just how much of an accelerating effect this crisis has had on various transformations in the economy. I already mentioned to you the example of local businesses in my neighborhood moving to more digital solutions, and this is something that we see globally as well. I already mentioned the accelerating climate transition, and I think this is very important. But we also need to consider the very significant shifts that are taking place in the labor market and the new ways of working that we're thinking about. And then, of course, we should also be thinking in relation to the digital transition about how there are new types of assets coming, and in particular, cryptocurrencies and crypto assets. And so I just think it's important to appreciate these very many changes happening in the global economic system today, and also why I think we will see some unpredictable effects and some of these changes. But let's just come back to the climate transition, and let's just look at some of the things that are going on. When I think about the climate transition, it's something that we've been working on for quite some time now, but I would suggest to you that 2015 was really a turning point where climate change became something that we talked about, rather than being something that we just talked about. That's something that started to become really tangible, both at the level of the economic policy, but also at the level of individual corporations in a significant manner. And indeed, over those recent years, we've seen a growing number of governments around the world adopt climate targets and also start to implement climate policies. But I think equally important is that we're also seeing individual companies commit to climate targets and also start to put it in place at the corporate level. And it's this interaction between the macro side, the macro policy side, and the micro side of the corporations that's really going to drive the transition. If I just zoom in on Europe on the policy front, Europe is indeed one of the leaders in the climate transition. And we've seen that the crisis brought about what we call the Next Generation EU Fund, a potential 750 billion euros. And one of the key elements in the Next Generation EU Fund is precisely to focus on the green and digital transitions. So this has really been an accelerating factor for the European economies in pursuing these transitions. Some of you may be aware as well that we have a very large legislative package in the pipeline with what we call Fit for 55. So the aim is to reduce our carbon emissions by 55% compared to the reference year of 1990 out to 2030. And just on this point, I just want to stop for a moment. You'll notice that I said the date 2030. And indeed, this is one of the things that again strikes me in the climate transition. We still often talk about 2050, and 2050 seems a long way away. But when we talk about 2030, it's just 8 years away from now. So we can see as well how the horizons in much of the climate policy is really shortening. Again, just sticking with what we're seeing on the European climate agenda, we see as well that the ECB has announced already last year that as part of its new monetary policy strategy, they are going to be implementing climate criteria. How is this going to work? Well, let me just zoom in on two areas. One area is that the ECB in its own corporate bond purchases will be thinking about climate criteria in purchasing this collateral. Indeed, previously, we used to think about market neutrality as being owning a portfolio that was in equal share representing the various asset classes inside of the market portfolio. But increasingly, we hear the term climate neutrality being used. Being climate neutral means that we are not increasing, not having a higher share of emissions through our investment choices. And this is something that's becoming a major driver, and we see it in particular in this definition of the ECB's new monetary policy. The ECB has previously wanted to be market neutral. Now they want to be climate neutral and perhaps go a step further and also contribute more aggressively to the climate transition. A second point, which I think is very important for us to consider, is that the ECB will also be applying these climate criteria to the private assets that they take in as collateral. And you can imagine this is something for the 2022-23 horizon. We'll see just what type of details the ECB gives us this year. But that means that in terms of the market pricing, once the central bank starts to distinguish between assets in such a manner, you will have much more of a distinction in pricing on the market functions as well. I wanted to come back and talk a little bit more about the economics of the climate transition and about some of the things that I'm watching and how it relates back to this discussion on inflation. Now, for those of you who may have had the happy memory of studying economics, you'll probably remember the supply and demand curves as being an important pillar of economic theory. And if we think about the climate transition, it is indeed left unchecked, potentially a very negative supply side shock. Capital will, as a result of the climate transition, will see an increasing speed at which the existing capital stock, our existing productive capital stock, will become obsolete, or perhaps in some cases simply stranded. Capital also is just one element of our classic production function. We need to think about labor and technology as well. And here I would say that education is a topic which is clearly very dear to me. I think it's very important. This is something that's not only important to secure sufficient skills for a successful transition, for an orderly climate transition, but it's also something that we know is very important for social mobility. And this is true both for children's education, but also for the lifelong learning that we as adults need to ensure. And on this front, I will say that while I'm fairly optimistic that we'll be able to get some strong investment, and indeed we're seeing with many of the government programs that are intended to support the economy as a follow-up as a follow-through to support recovery after the pandemic, I'm a little bit more concerned by what I'm seeing on the education front, and in particular by the toll that the pandemic may have taken on education. And I'm hoping that we will see more policy focus directed to this area over time. And indeed, education also links into fostering those new technologies that we know are all important for the climate transition. And here too, it's important that we see advances in private public partnerships in developing those technologies. So when I think about the inflationary aspects of the climate transition, indeed, if we take a less positive view, we can build a story where we have a significant destruction on the supply side of the existing capital stock, perhaps insufficient skills on labor, insufficient technology. This is a risk scenario to my mind, but it's a risk scenario that materializes if we fail to invest, to educate, and to build those circumstances to foster research and development. I'm reasonably optimistic on the capacity to do that, but what I am a bit worried about today is some of the green divides that potentially could be emerging at the global level. And this is something we need to be very mindful of. How do those green divides arise? Well, we saw at the COP26 that there's a concern about a green divide between advanced and emerging economies. We hear a lot of chatter about things like carbon border taxes, and we also really need to consider the direction of capital flows. Let me just give you an example of the type of thing I could be worried about. Imagine a hypothetical company that's looking to locate some form of production somewhere in the world. It's tempting for that company perhaps to go and locate themselves in one of the Nordic countries where green energy is well advanced, where there's quite low political risk, and where it's perhaps quite easy to ensure the greenness, if I can use that term, of this production capacity. But from the point of view of the global economy, it would make much more sense for that company to go somewhere where that green energy is not yet available and actually help develop it and put it into place. Now, of course, for that to happen, we need strong policies, strong policy support. And this is where the COP26 promises to support capital flows and to ensure that they keep flowing to the emerging economies and developing economies is something that I think is very critical to watch. The second green divide that I wanted to mention in our discussion today is at the corporate level. Indeed, I think there's a risk that corporations that are not paying enough attention to the question of the climate transition risk falling behind. And this is both in terms of financing and supply chains and attracting talent. And of course, there's a final green divide that we need to be very conscious of. Many of you will have seen here in France that we had the Yellow Vest movement, which was triggered, amongst other factors, but which was triggered by a tax on diesel. And here we really need to consider how the climate transition will impact various income groups across our society and make sure that we ensure a fair transition to avoid a significant increase in social tensions, which of course at the end of the day are costly for all. So when I look ahead today, we can really appreciate how important it is to have the right policy design, but also to have the right corporate strategies at the micro level. And it's the combination of the two that will ensure a very strong road ahead. I hope I've been able to impress upon you that the climate transition is really something that we see happening on the ground today. And indeed, I just want to mention to you that one of the things that I personally am working a lot on at the moment are the current round of climate stress tests that we're conducting in the banking system here in Europe. So climate transition, it's no longer about a distant future. It's happening now. There will be bumps along the road, but if we can maintain the momentum for acceleration that we're seeing today at both the micro and macro levels, I have a lot of confidence that what I call a fairly orderly transition, as I say, there will be some bumps, can be achieved. And what I'm really watching in this climate transition is precisely that. It's this momentum of tangible action on the ground, which I think is the key variable to be keeping an eye on. I'd like to close now and thank you for your attention and hand back Hanan to guide you through the rest of the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Michala, please, do you want to take over?
No, it's okay. Just to say thank you, Michala. Please, Florida, go on. Yeah.
Of course. No, thank you so much, Michala. Basically, it's fairly simple somehow. No, I'm joking. I think what was really impressive with regards to what you explained to us is these complex layers, that we are subject to as business owners, and that somehow we need to understand in order to take those decisions that are going to impact our family businesses in the future. Because of course, as family firms, we are as concerned with the next 12 months as we are with the next 20 years. And I think that's really where the tension arises for family business owners in terms of, how to move forward. So thank you so much for being with us today. And I'm sure there will be a lot of questions. Maybe we can relay them to you and get back to our attendees later on with your answers.
Please do. And thank you very much for having had me today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Michala. So, as I said, fairly simple, right? I think what we wanted to do with this session is really give us a bit of the macro view of what are we talking about in the next, couple of years? What are going to be the economic trends that are going to impact us? And I'd like to now change the pace a little bit and go down to the level of the main topic of today, which is sustainability, and invite our go-to member, Samar Ibrahim, who is our go-to member for anything sustainability related in Tharawat. And she will really deep dive with us into this question of what are the mega trends that we have to be aware of and what really sustainability means in its entirety, which we will then follow up on in our panel discussion. So Samar, thank you so much for always obliging when it comes to sustainability questions, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here. Thank you everybody for coming. And as always, a pleasure to do this. We have a video we can get started with first.
You okay? You need a minute? Cool. Okay. Listen up, people. I know a thing or two about extinction. And let me tell you, and you'd kind of think this would be obvious, going extinct is a bad thing. And driving yourselves extinct? In 70 million years, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. At least we had an asteroid. What's your excuse? You're headed for a climate disaster, and yet every year governments spend hundreds of billions of public funds on fossil fuel subsidies. Imagine if we had spent hundreds of billions per year subsidizing giant meteors. That's what you're doing right now. Think of all the other things you could do with that money. Around the world, people are living in poverty. Don't you think helping them would make more sense than, I don't know, paying for the demise of your entire species? Let me be real for a second. You've got a huge opportunity right now. As you rebuild your economies and bounce back from this pandemic, this is humanity's big chance. So here's my wild idea. Don't choose extinction. Save your species before it's too late. It's time for you humans to stop making excuses and start making changes. Thank you.
The probability of extinction is actually not that far-fetched. We live in a day and age where if you look at the World Economic Forum's recently launched Perception of Risks survey, and the next 10 years, the most severe risks of the top 5, 3 are linked to climate. The environment is not something that we should look at lightly. It's not a tree-hugging component. It's something that will affect every single person as an individual and as a business. Now, of those top 3, you'll notice the green bars at the top are a lot thicker than the red bars at the top. That's simply coming to show you that the impacts and the side effects of these risks are so much more than we are actually anticipating. So we've already seen a small view of what the climate disasters are doing with the weather changes that we've seen, with the storms and the droughts that we've come. That's only the start of it. It will get worse if we don't do something about it. And I want to highlight something. I think Michala also touched upon it. We see this agenda of 2060 and 2070 becoming carbon neutral, and it paints this image of this is so far off that we don't need to worry about this today. The reality is we do, simply because there are immediate side effects. You have short-term, medium-term, and long-term implications that we need to be aware of and need to understand. And as businesses, if we don't, we run the risk of falling too deep to be able to come back out. There have been many agendas that look at how do we deal with climate change. This is not something new. It's been around for at least 50 years. The last of which was the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But they too have been struggling. There are many hurdles that they've been trying to cross. And just to put it a little bit into numbers perspective, I wanted to share a few data points. So with the onset of COVID, this has not helped. This has actually brought us back. You have the first rise in extreme poverty in a generation. That means we have an agenda that we need to try and figure as individuals and as companies to try and close in on. The developing markets are struggling with funding as to how do they look at renewables. They have the largest source and yet they are not able to get access to it. How can we help that out? We've wiped out 20 years of progress in education. So we've done all this progress, we've put students in schools, we've gotten girls to go into classrooms, and then COVID hit. And then we realized there was a divide in a world where not everybody had technology, not everybody had a computer and access to a teacher virtually. So how do you deal with this? How do we fix this problem? And last but not least, foreign direct investment has dropped by up to 40%. We're looking at economic growth after a COVID drop. How are we going to do that? Where do we start? And the saddest one, I think, for me is world hunger. It's something we actually have the ability to solve. We have the resources, we have the natural ability to feed everybody, but for some reason we can't agree on how to distribute food. Very, very sad. But with that said, we're at the cusp of a new horizon. Why? Simply because sustainability is at a tipping point. What this means is that economic incentives, behavioral shifts, and technological advancements are actually converging. And with this convergence, they're actually creating a nexus for change. Now, what does this mean? So I'm just going to put it a little bit into perspective for everybody. There are certain enablers within this nexus. So the first enabler, when we look at technological advancements, is to look at the shift from closed to open innovation and digitization. So you have companies, you have cities, you have governments that are actually opening up and saying, we have a challenge, who can help us? By crowdsourcing this information and causing collaboration to rise, we see a shift in technological advancements that's never been there before. Economic incentives, we see more and more businesses, even cities in the way that they operate, looking at a stakeholder perspective and becoming more stakeholder centric and moving away from just shareholder value. And last but not least, definitely, is behavioral shifts. You'll see something as simple as reporting on your sustainability agenda is no longer just about reporting. It's about how do I change my business to have purpose embedded deep within the business. That's just one of the components from a behavioral shift. What I want to do now is just touch upon the top 5 sustainability trends that we see coming in 2022 and 2023, and how these different factors play a part, and you'll start seeing where this convergence is coming through and why there's a drive for this change. So the top 5 trends are sustainable finance, which Michala touched upon a little bit, energy transitions, which we see especially in this region of the world really pushing forward, food sustainability, carbon positive, and of course, circular economy. Let's start with sustainable finance. Sustainable finance, you have technologies that are allowing data to be aggregated and collected properly. So you have AI that can sift through unstructured data. You've got blockchain that can filter out what needs to be analyzed and what doesn't. This will then lead to more and better investment decision-making processes, hence driving the shift towards sustainable finance. Then you've got economic incentives. $45 trillion of investment are under management are shifting into a portfolio linked to climate change. That's a drastic shift, where in the past it was a risk, it is now an opportunity. And then of course, green bonds. I'm sure 5 years ago, if you had said the word green bonds, everybody looked at you in a blank face, not knowing what it meant. Now we see that it is skyrocketed, especially in the year 2021, as to the value of these green bonds in market. So these 3 coming together is causing this shift to really take place. Then we get to the energy transition. We have technologies that are enabling renewable energy, solar panels, the wind pipes and turbines, wind turbines, are being produced at a cost-effective rate. Hence, we're able to scale these technologies and get renewable energy to feed into a grid, where you have certain countries around the world that are actually balancing renewable and non-renewable energy into their grid so that they can slowly transition out. You have Larry Fink, who last week made the bold statement that 1,000 of the next unicorns to be released are going to be in the climate energy space. So that's a big investment and a big opportunity for those who want to invest in these startups. And then, of course, you have not only oil and gas companies, but you have countries that are shifting their portfolios from fossil fuels into renewables. Saudi Arabia, the Vision 2030 is a prime example. It is a country reliant completely and solely on fossil fuels. What are they doing? They're transitioning their way out. Then we get to food sustainability. We have enough technologies today where you can farm in the desert in a very sustainable way. You have regenerative technologies that are coming around to help us bring back the ecosystems that we've once destroyed and bring back biodiversity, which we've slowly tried to eliminate without really knowing that we were. The alternative meat and dairy products value and market is actually skyrocketing. So what went from I'm going to have a piece of burger that is not made of meat as being something really cool and funky and you try once in a blue moon to becoming mainstream, where McDonald's is actually trying to look at it becoming something that they can scale. So there is a drive and a shift there. And then, of course, my favorite, we've got, from a behavioral change perspective, we've got vegetarianism, we've got veganism, and now we have a rise in climatarianism. So you see that even as individuals, we're trying to make this shift. We're trying to understand how we can help because we've all become more eco-conscious. And of course, I don't know if you've ever tried, but I have yet to try, but I've seen them. You've got like ants covered in chocolate, beetles covered in sugar. These are a source of protein that we've overlooked for years. Societies and tribes have lived off of them, but we just never realized they were there. Carbon positive. There's a lot of innovation and digitalization that's happening whereby we're looking at eco-transport. You've got airplanes that are looking at ways to fuel the way that they drive, electric cars that are skyrocketing into your neighbors around you each have an electric car. It's no longer a nice to have, it's something that people are becoming the norm to have. Then comes the economic incentive of cities that are investing in low carbon investments. There's a value of 16.6 trillion. That's a lot of money that's being invested in this area. And from a behavioral perspective, 1/5 of the world's largest 2,000 companies have already pledged net zero. The issue is net zero is not carbon positive, because carbon positive is the ability to give back more than what you emit. So I'm not just removing the carbons that my company puts out there, I'm putting back more, I'm supporting more, I'm investing in solar, I'm investing in regenerative technologies, I'm doing more. Why do we need to look at this agenda? Simply because the only way to reverse the degradation that we've already done is to give back more. Last but not least, the circular economy. It's been around for years. So why is it now something a little bit more feasible? Technology perspective, you've got more efficient technologies around recycling, reducing energy efficiency in your buildings. So there's a way that you can close the loop on many of your productions and your supply chains are a little bit more efficient. Economic incentive, there is a $45 billion potential that needs to be unlocked and has yet to be touched upon from an economic perspective. And then behavioral, you have countries around the world and cities around the world that are starting to put out regulations and policies. And as businesses, if you're not ready for these policies and these changes, you will be stopped at a standstill. And that's where you'll realize, I can't do anything quickly enough to be able to catch up to market. So you need to start looking at this early on. I'd like to conclude by saying that I think the time and the age with the awareness that we all have from an eco-awareness perspective, understanding what it means to be sustainable, what it means to be green, greenwashing is actually phasing out. We cannot allow for greenwashing to continue. And I think maybe we're shifting more into the green wishing, where we wish that we can achieve these pledges that we've made. And I think now it's just up to how do we do that? Thank you. not sure where to
I think we all now know why Samar is our Chief Sustainability Member at Tharawat. Thank you so much for this fantastic insight. I'd like to invite Sana Jubaili to join us on stage for our panel discussion. Can I ask you to? Yes, I can see you. All right, so you've met Samar. Let me briefly introduce our other member, Sana Jubaili. Sana, welcome to our stage. Sana is a third-generation family business member at Jubaili Bros, and also in her own right, I would say one of the most innovative social change makers within the family business field. So I'm really delighted to have, these two fantastic family business members here today to perhaps deep dive a little bit into now the practical level. So I think we've had a very macroeconomic view, which is something that I think we have to agree we are mostly subject to. It's not really something we can influence. Then I think Samar beautifully broke down the realities of the mega trends that we are facing more from a sustainability angle. And now I think the question is really, what are we doing as business owners? How do we, push that agenda, and how do we create change for a more sustainable future? I am not on Instagram. I have my questions here, but also someone knows that I'm not on Instagram. I'm a horrible social media person, but I have my questions here, but I'm also going to be aware that any members from our Zoom community, if you want to ask any questions, I will receive them here and I can ask them to our lovely panelists. So maybe let's get started perhaps with a quick introduction of yourselves. Maybe Sana, can I start with you? I know this is not a prepared question, but maybe can you just talk a little bit about your role in your family business, what you do, and what you've been driving in the past?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. So Sana Jubaili, and I'm working in the family business. And when I started over 7 years ago, I had come from a social development background working with local NGOs. And I took that passion for working with people into the family business context in HR. But then my father's one of the founders said, okay, well, we need to do CSR. So what was CSR before? It was discreetly giving donations in the local communities where we worked. And so coming in, we wanted to put some recording on what we were doing and putting something formal into place, and also looking at all aspects of CSR. And so to give you a little context, Jubaili Bros sells diesel generators. So we provide energy solutions through generators and use of diesel. And so for us, we do see that we have a big role to play. How do we transfer from providing energy solutions based on diesel into renewable? And that's a very complex, and I've been working very hard, and it's a huge challenge to really change a business model of the organization and calling it CSR.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sana. Just to give people an understanding of the multitude of opinions and dimensions we have here on stage, maybe, Samar, can you just explain a little bit what you're doing currently, the roles you've had, and your relationship with your family business?
So currently, I work with Ernst & Young. It's as a consultant. So I work with governments across the Middle East and North Africa, and we look at having the conversation around designing the future of cities and how do you embed sustainability into the conversations that they have. So that's my current role. Previous to that, I was a consultant at the Prime Minister's office, which is where my interest in future cities came into play. And prior to that, I was a sustainability consultant. So there's a little bit of variety there. But I do come from a family business. We own a construction company that looks at civil infrastructure. Unfortunately, or fortunately, I'm not going to say, I'm not deeply embedded into it.
That's another session.
Yes, I do have a say on the outside.
Absolutely. Thank you. So why I think this is a really interesting panel, and not just because they're fantastic speakers, but also because we have representation from two industries that actually are quite impactful when we think of, sustainability as a whole, but specifically kind of the environmental impact. So I think what's really interesting to me to start off with, when I was preparing this session, a lot of people came to me and they were saying, honestly, Farida, like sustainability, what? I mean, it's too vague. Like, what do you mean, right? And I think that Samar's presentation has shown that it's a complex topic, but I'd love to start off with maybe having your opinions kind of when you hear the word sustainability, what does it mean to you personally? And maybe break it down to maybe tangible things, that you can think about. Sana?
Sustainability to me in a corporate context means acting as a responsible company. And so looking at what type of impact you as a company have. So it's on societies, first and foremost, through how you treat your employees. And then it's looking at the communities where you operate and what impact you do. So we also have manufacturing. How do we get rid of the waste? And then also, the popular ESG is also looking at the governance. So making sure that you are working with also responsible businesses and having the right policies and procedures in the company to make sure that there's no nepotism or favoritism or even corruption.
Thank you so much. Thoughts?
It's a complicated question.
I mean, we don't have 4 hours.
I think for me, sustainability in one word or in one statement is doing the right thing. Everybody looks at it from 3 windows: economic, social, environmental. Everybody chooses which one they prefer. I think you cannot be sustainable if you don't do all 3.
Very interesting. So I think just by these 2 answers, we know it's a complex topic, right? And I think we need to be honest about that. And there's no shame in admitting that it is a complex topic. And as a business owner, we already are facing so many complex decisions. How do we now take a decision with regards to what I'm going to focus on? So what I'd love to perhaps start discussing, and I'd like to invite you, if you agree, disagree with any of the statements that are being made, please raise your hand and we'd love to include you in our conversation. When it comes down to reflecting on your concrete steps that you want to take in your family business, we have an advantage being family business owners. We actually have decision-making power to a certain extent, some of us more than others, but we have an impact, right? So I think let's establish that first link, which a lot of other people don't. So we have an advantage there. Now, with that power comes the responsibility, not to quote someone else, comes the responsibility to actually decide where to go. And I think what I'd love to hear from you is perhaps your thought pattern, mainly Sana, and maybe Samar, you can share what you've seen in other family businesses. How do people go about that? How do you decide, okay, I have a company that obviously has a footprint. That footprint is complex. Where do I go first?
So I was very lucky because the founders both were committed to financial investments in a CSR program and even the manpower investments. So definitely starting off with getting the buy-in from the leadership team and forming a team. So you can't do it just by yourself. And we created a vision, we created a mission and strategic objectives. Now, in the first few years, we obviously went for the low-hanging fruit. So we started recycling, we had a tree planting exercise, we volunteered care package at a labor camp. And that was great because it got the momentum going and employees felt like, okay, the company's doing something. But where we struggled was to really incorporate it into the core of our operation. So one of the ideas we had, why don't we teach our customers how to take care of their generator? The generator will last longer. They'll be more efficient in the diesel. They'll need less spare parts. But that involved getting into the operations, getting into the sales, getting into the marketing, and it was just too difficult. So definitely for us, what was great was starting with the low-hanging fruit and being absolutely, you have to be persistent. And what's helping us today is that it's a sexy word, sustainability, for one, and governments are putting incentives and companies like Société Générale are giving funding. And so for us, it's now making sense to tap into that economic aspect, which is providing great momentum. So I think, a plan, low-hanging fruit, and persistence.
I like that. I think the low-hanging fruits, it's something that's comforting, right? Because it's low-hanging. So you can actually get it done and you can see the results right away. Thank you for that insight. A friend of mine recently told me, he's a 4th-generation family member. He's like, I'm trying to explain to my family, it's not about doing more, it's about doing things differently. And I thought that was actually quite insightful, right? Because we are so afraid that as a company, we work on a budget. We don't want to go over that. We cannot afford to go over that. How do I change? Any thoughts on that, Samar?
I think if you don't have it embedded at the top, it's very difficult to move out. So I've done a lot of work with family businesses and corporates. At the end of the day, if the person at the top doesn't believe in it, you're not going to get very far. And that whole CSR, I'm going to tick the box, do the low-hanging fruit, is the easy thing that everybody does. I think the challenge then becomes on how do you create economic value for this change? So even from our own family business, I've come through with some ideas. Everybody's like, but nobody else in the market does it. So you're asking us to invest more and not be able to profit off of it. And there's no return on this investment yet. So what I'm hoping for is, with the way that governments are going and the regulations are going, there will now become an economic incentive to change, because I think that was the piece of the puzzle that was always missing, is where's the economic value in this?
Absolutely, and fair enough. I mean, you have other worries. You have to sustain your organization going forward. I'd love to invite you, if you have any comments or opinions about what's being said here, to participate, because I think, let's talk a little bit about the personal side of these things. As we know, in family businesses, it's always easy and it's always shiny. But I think we have different layers of decision making. We have different generations who have different opinions about what is relevant and what is important, right, going forward. So perhaps talking a little bit, I have this theory that for me, E and S, in terms of the ESG, environmental and social impact, are the two things we need to do, and the governance needs to be the engine. So governance is a given, right? We need governance. So what can we do? If you think of maybe some of the families that you know that perhaps don't have this sophisticated approach that you have, how can we kick that off? How can we have this conversation and incentivize the different groups, the different generations, the different interests to have a conversation around sustainability in its broadest sense? Maybe let's start with you.
For me, I think you do need to have somebody dedicated about it, to look at sustainability within your businesses, to understand the full spectrum. And this person is not this marketing department, and it's not the HR department. This is a dedicated individual that understands your business, and a person that is an advisor to the CEO, a person that can look at the agenda that the CEO is looking at and come and say, all right, we do it this way. How about we change the way a little bit that operating model or the business model and tweak it so that we can adjust this or tailor it to this. The minute you start having these conversations is where you'll start seeing it in a different light. You'll start understanding that, okay, this is part of my business. This is not something I put on the side. And if I have enough budget, then I will bring it in. I think that's a starting point for me.
It is interesting because obviously every single family business that we know has a very clear idea of its values and its kind of nature and where it comes from. Sometimes I do think that once it comes to individual action, those things sometimes fall short a little bit. So what would you recommend, Sana, having done this yourself, for a very long time now, maybe what are the obstacles that you see also in other families, and how would you overcome them?
Yes, so I'll tell you a story. My brother, who was also in the family business, was very into the sustainability environment. And 10 years ago, he's like, Dad, I'm not going to come unless we do solar. And he's like, okay, come. And the problem was 10 years ago, there wasn't a case for solar. The business model wouldn't work. The technologies, the panels were too expensive. There wasn't the demand. Fast forward 10 years, that has all changed. And he was able to launch it a few years ago. So one of the things is build a case. And how do you build a case? So a piece of advice that I got was record and communicate. So gather the numbers. Something that's helping us today is that our workforce is actually looking for a sense of purpose. And so one way that we can really build the case is employee engagement and retention comes through employees feeling like they're working for a responsible company. And then they will be that much more committed and that much more engaged. So building the case through not only a financial P&L, but it's also through retention of employees and productivity of employees.
Thank you so much for that. I think that's definitely, very important to showcase to all these different, sections in the decision-making process, what you're talking about. I'd like to ask our audience a couple of questions, because I think it will be interesting for us to know a little bit where you stand. So of all the owners in the room, I'd love to know, first of all, is sustainability something that you talk about at a regular pace? So do you regularly in your family and in your business talk about sustainability? So who talks about sustainability? Please raise your hands. Okay, so I would say a good half of the room. We're not going to point fingers. And then the second question that I would like to ask is, when you speak of sustainability, is there a clear strategy, or do you more talk about it as a concern without any action plan? So who has a clear strategy and action plans?
I'd love to know what company it is.
I know she's actually digging a hole for herself. Okay. She's going to be speaking. Okay, great. Well, that's very interesting because it shows that half of the room is actually concerned about it and sees it as a topic. But then so far in this room inside, and I don't know if we have any Zoom people who have voted, but I think it's really interesting to see that we have that gap between concern and awareness and activation. Jomana, I don't know if you'd like to, talk a little bit about what your experience is on this.
It will take a couple of minutes if you're
sure.
Okay, so Jomana Hasri, I'm a family member, Sana Hasri Group, 5th generation from one side, 3rd from the other. Actively now we're 3 generations on the board. We're Lebanese origin, so our HQ is in Lebanon. Historically, we're in security, food, very diversified. And the transition to go to the new CEO from my generation was back, getting prepared in 2010. And my brother was selected to be CEO. And from my mother, who was the CEO. So it took till 2016 because it takes time. And when the first thing he does when he becomes CEO, he says, we are going green. Excellent. So we're going green as part of the strategy declared by our new CEO. And how are we doing that? We're in security, we're in food, we're in distribution. We have a very high carbon footprint. Are we going to reduce? No, we're actually going to make a joint venture with a module manufacturer. Oh, yes. Are we going to do that? And that's 2016. Why would we do that? There is no, solar business in our area. It will come. And since 2016, he took the decision to go to China to find a family business, a Chinese family business, which is the 10th biggest solar manufacturer of modules. We made a JV in 2018, and now we are leaders in the Middle East because this is when the market is. And I'm now woman in solar, Middle East and Africa, when I had no clue. When he decided in 2016, he pushed me in 2018 to China. In 2020, I was elected by Mezaya Women in Solar. So this is how a decision is taken by a family member. So the power to actually move the money, it was taken from an emotional point of view because we needed to eradicate our carbon footprint, but then it had to have an economic sense. So the economic sense was the trade. What we know, we trade, we are traders for 5 generations. So doing the same in the sustainable arena made sense to him. And now for me, it's my life. And I tell him, don't ever come with any other plans. I'm just the CEO of this company. That's it. I'll retire there. So we have a lot of opportunities, all of us, until 2050 at least. So demand is higher than supply, as we saw it in Samar's presentation and Michala also. So obviously, it was a good choice economically and obviously environmentally. And I can tell you, it has shifted everybody's attention. Of course, we are UN Global Compact. Of course, we have the SDGs, but they are no longer report material. They are now embedded in the company DNA. We are all, green mind people. We look now at making a factory in the area to reduce shipping carbon footprint and so on. So that's our story.
Amazing.
It takes a leader to push, and
fantastic.
The opportunities are there.
Just if I can ask one question, when you looked at bringing in the solar panels and the way that has changed your mind frame in your family business, do you feel like that mind frame has shifted into what you do with agriculture or what you do in securities, or is it only centered on this?
Absolutely. It spills on everything. First of all, HQ is one building. So we have central departments. So the same finance, the same marketing across companies. So of course, everybody had said, what is this solar business coming to do? So there was a lot of learning, and then the mingling. And then, yes, slowly it builds on everybody. It's a culture.
Exactly.
And when you have the family, already the family, values, how you communicate with the employees, how you retain them, then you can just transfer exactly the same. You transfer the new attention, you shift their attention to something either they weren't educated or exposed enough to. And when you earn, let's say, exposure, like now we're really at the forefront in solar. When you say solar, you think of our family with government interactions and so on. So obviously now we have a role to play, and we stand very firm on this new
should be very proud.
environmental.
Fantastic. I mean, honestly, I'll pretend that this was planned. So thank you so much, Jumana, for sharing that story. And I think I'd love to hear your reaction as well, Sana, to this story, because I think it's quite similar in a way to what you have done. Let's focus maybe on one point. And we have a question also an interesting question from Zoom, which I'm going to ask. But how amazing that as a family business, we have this capacity to look at something we want to change because of a value that we have, and then we are smart enough to find economic sense into it and find a new market and actually grow into a leader in that space. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that, because I know that's also what you're pushing for.
Well, for me, what's very interesting, and it goes back more to the type of family business, is when you do have a visionary or someone comes in with an idea that's not mainstream, how do you support it while at the same time being responsible to the business? So I think that what I see is that business took a big risk, and in the end, that risk paid off, because I'm familiar with that industry, and it really hasn't picked up in Lebanon, at least for quite some time. So I think that taking calculated risks is important, and again, having that plan and the vision at the top is so important.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a whole other conversation we could have about the regional challenges that we are facing with regards to just the awareness level of, what it is that we're talking about today. And that's why I was so happy to see so many families, both online and here present, interested in this question of sustainability, because I can tell you, if Sarawat had done this event 10 years ago, everybody would have just looked at us with googly eyes and gone like, what are you talking about? And so I think there is a shift, but I do think our region is particularly challenging when it comes to awareness, because we have so many other challenges, right? It's almost, someone told me, Farida, isn't this a luxury problem? Because honestly, we have everyday fights to fight, and it, and I don't think it can be a luxury problem, but, I understand that some people feel that it is. So we have a question from Zoom, which I'd like to pose to both of you, actually. The member is asking, how important are government incentives? And I think, coming from Michaela's question down to Samar's presentation, clearly this is an ecosystem challenge that we are facing. So as an individual family, we can only do so much. So, maybe you have experience with it. Obviously you have a role to play, but maybe you have a personal experience or something that you'd like to share with regards to government incentives.
Well, to be honest, I mean, we are primarily in the Middle East and Africa, and so we don't see that in our region. For us, what is the biggest impact is access to funding. So Société Générale, World Bank, IFC, that's where we see is opening the doors to allow people who don't have the upfront costs to pay for that new technology that's going to actually last them longer than they'd have to be paying diesel. So for us, and obviously, the governments in Europe are helping, but the funders coming in to give that funding to help businesses go towards the renewable energy is the most important.
So you would assess that in this region, we are still far away from, government incentives actually having an impact on your economic decision making.
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. Okay. So
I do have to agree with her. The region has been lagging behind, but you cannot forget that in the last 2 months, November, the US, Saudi Arabia and the UAE both claimed to pledge for carbon neutrality.
Yes.
That will be the biggest driver for policies, taxation, different rules and regulations that will change, and it'll be a domino effect. Once that happens, you're going to have the financial sector coming and saying, okay, you know what, we need to put in more incentives. You'll have businesses that say, I can't operate because I now have to either pay more taxes or deal with policies. So I do believe that, unfortunately, we don't do the carrot, we more of the stick.
Absolutely.
And the government needs to come in and take that stick, because we haven't done very well with the carrot.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think the carrot is actually, there's so much interesting things, so many interesting things that the governments can do, going forward. I'd love to open to the floor if there are any questions or comments. Anyone kind of, yes, Magda. Sure, go ahead. Questions are okay. Not everybody has to,
Hi, I'm Magdalena. I have a question to the panel. I mean, how do you actually measure the impact of your sustainability efforts? Because this is something that we do intrinsically, not the measurement, but we, as a wastewater treatment business, we are sustainable, and we always look with certain metrics to minimize chemicals to have the best wastewater effluent. But how do you measure the impact, like in general, if you have any pointers? Thanks.
Do you want to go first, then Mike?
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
So I'm going to tell you it from a theoretical perspective, because this is how I've done it in my previous world, when I was a sustainability consultant. At KPMG, I used to work with certain clients where there are certain ways, and now in EY as a consultant, you come in and there are ways where you can put a value on a certain project that you do for the community. There's an actual monetary value. There's a monetary value on the tree that you plant or the water that you save. Every single natural resource officially now has a specific value allocated to it. Yes. Different sources have published it and different sources have calculated it internally. So it's still, because it's so nascent and people are still trying to come to grips with it, it's not something available relevantly. You can do, carbon is one of the measurements you can measure. You can even measure, so we have assessments that we look at. For example, this is something very, very generic, but if you host an event, you can tell the impact that that event has done on your community. And you can measure it in monetary value. Was the amount of money that I just spent on this event that is putting awareness on, I don't know, waste management of water or water retention? What is the impact from an economic, from a social, and from an environmental perspective? And it comes with monetary value. There's ways that companies are starting to measure not just their profits. So at the end of the year, when I look at how much money I've made or what profit I've given or I've made at the end of the year, it's no longer about the money that came in. It's about how much have I put back into the environment? How much have I put back into my people? What have you done for training to your individuals, to your employees? That is part of your measurements. That's part of your profit. So it's the metrics of how you measure has changed. Unfortunately, I don't have the answer as to is it publicly available, because it's still something that we as consultants have access to, but it's something that we've found an internal way of doing it.
I think this is a really, really important topic, and maybe we can pick it back up later on, because I think if we want to really make first steps, as business people, we need to measure things. We need to know, what am I doing? Is what I'm doing actually impactful? Does it have the impact that I want to have? Otherwise, we might as well stay in the traditional CSR space and kind of feel good about the money we spend on certain projects, right? So I think metrics is a really, really important and complex topic. Sadly, we have to start closing the panel. However, after the break, we'll have an opportunity to continue talking. But I wanted to close with giving you the opportunity of, based on everything that you've said, and now we understand a little bit of something about what you've done, all the amazing things you've done in your background. When you're facing another family business member who perhaps has not yet started on that journey, or who would like to start on that journey, what are some of the 2-3 points or first steps that you would recommend them to do to have, a kickstart on this trajectory? Maybe Sana.
I mean, for one, I would start by asking, what do we already do that we can consider CSR? Because in fact, without knowing it, businesses are already doing things. So the first one is asking that. And then the second is to put in a system in place that measures it. And then bringing a core team. And I always say, try to get someone from the operation, somebody from the marketing, someone from HR, from finance, and bring them together and to start making a plan. I mean, something modest for the next year. I would say that.
I like that. Kind of start with the things you have, start with clear goals, and then, kick it off. Samar.
For me, it'll actually be something very similar, where not just start with what you have, understand what you have. So we already do CSR. Is this specific project actually worth doing? Mm-hmm. Is there some return for you in some long run? Is it something that you will find value in? So it's not just about, I want to give. It's, I want to give, but what do you get in return? Try to analyze what you already do. And once you get to that analysis, you'll start having a clearer picture of, you know what, I'm not going to donate books to a school. I'm actually going to donate my people to go and teach certain lessons throughout the school because it's more long-term. So you just start shifting the way that you think when you start analyzing what you're doing and try to look at give and take relationship. It's not just, I want to tick a box.
And perhaps maybe we can agree with my friend's statement of saying, don't do more, but do differently. I think that kind of, in my sense, summarizes a lot of the efforts that I've heard today. And of course, let us use the commercial ingenuity of family businesses. As Jumana said, you know, if you have 5 generations of traders, you know how to make it work as traders. It's just that now the landscape is a little different, so you make it work differently. So I think that for me is a very great example of also the examples we have sitting here today. So thank you. I mean, I can keep going for like 2 hours, but we're not going to subject everybody else to that. But thank you so much, Sana and Samar, for the fantastic insights, for the depth of conversation. And we're looking forward. We're going to have a short break. So even our friends online have a coffee. We'll have a short break, we'll have a chat, and then we'll come back for our final session, which is really all about implementation. So how are we now going to do everything that we've learned about today? So thank you once again. Thank you, Jumana. Thank you, for Magda, for everyone's attention, and looking forward to seeing you later after the break. Thank you.
Thanks.
So it was, until now, we had a really great conversation about sustainability, about what is happening, the global challenges. How do we tackle this? How do we integrate all these important topics within our business? How do we build together a better and sustainable future? This is something that we're going to discuss now with my colleague, Hacina Py. She's the Group Chief Sustainable Officer for Société Générale. And welcome, Hacina. Can you hear us?
Thank you. Yeah. Can you hear me?
So we're happy to have you with us, and please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everybody. I wish I was there with you. The atmosphere seems very nice, and in my past had a pleasure to come very much to this region, which I appreciate a lot. So I heard that you mentioned our purpose there, that we want to build a better world, more sustainable future together with our clients. And for me, this is not only words. And I think it's interesting that the law in France, at least, has invited us to write a purpose for our company. Before, precisely 50 years ago, it was clearly said in the capitalist world that the purpose of the company, the sole purpose, was only to maximize shareholders' value. That was the point. 50 years later, we see that this sense for the corporation has probably led the world to a strange situation where we are consuming much more than the resources of the planet, where we don't really have a sense for what is right, what is responsible, what is sustainable. But all of a sudden, there is this awakening, and you had the discussions already this morning. The awakening is a bit brutal for some counterparts, but it's good. I think it's the right moment. We clearly have a momentum right now, and probably if we do it right, if we really push hard, and we'll see how, in this decade, we could make a difference. We are not going to reverse the situation, but we could stop. We could maintain the global temperature increase to something that is still okay, let's say, for the not for the planet, for the humanity, or more precisely, for the way we live on this planet. So just a parenthesis here, why not for the planet? A lot of people say, okay, now we need to save the planet. That's wrong. The planet is fine. During the break in December, I had the pleasure to make an experience that maybe you would like to try. It's called the Deep Time Walk. You find it on your telephone. It's a free app. It invites you to walk 4.6 kilometers, and each meter is 1 million year. Oh, sorry, problem with my mic. Sorry. Each meter is 1 million year of the history of the planet. So it's quite long. You walk 4.6 kilometers and you hear all the stories about the creation of a lot of different little things and hydrogen with oxygen, creating water, permitting life. It's quite fascinating, but you will realize that you're going to walk more than an hour, and the story of humanity is going to start at the very end. And the story of the problem we created over, let's say, the past 150 years, but more abundantly in the past 50 years, is nothing. It's just a millimeter in the long walk you've been doing. So I encourage you to try. It's not bad. But then you realize several things. First, you realize that what's going on right now is not a problem of the planet, because the planet has gone several times around terrible cycles, and it had the possibility to regenerate. The thing that you learn as well is, as I said, the damages have been caused only on a tiny portion of the story. And so if we really do invest a lot of energy and creativity now in this decade, probably we can stop the building of the big problem, manage it, let's say. And also, and then that's a bit new for me, looking more into the biodiversity issues, I just realized that not only can we stop the loss of this biodiversity, we lost 70% of biodiversity over the last 50 years. We could stop it, but on top of that, we could even go with nature positive programs, meaning that over the coming 30 years, by 2050, we could rebuild part of the lost biodiversity. So I know that a lot of people get depressed about these climate things after having denied the issue. But now what is clear is that it's time to act. So you mentioned very rightly that corporations alone cannot do much. And it takes a strong government will, it takes regulation. So in many parts of the world, things are moving. In Europe, for example, we have quite a clear plan, at least to 2030, which is not that bad, to act. We'll act, and if we don't want to act, for example, as a bank, we'll have some penalties in terms of capital, we'll have trouble to access capital markets. It's getting quite clear that it was a friendly invitation, and now it's going to be regulation everywhere. Now, for sure, in terms of what we want to do in the future, for me at least, things have to be with sense and with responsibility. And that could be the North Star of everything that we do. Not because we are obliged by regulation and so on, but because we think forward, and that's very much in line with family business. And we need to decide which world we want and what are the rules. The first rule is maximize stakeholders' value, not only shareholders. That's very clear. And the spirit of it for me is things have to be done with sense and responsibility. I had this discussion with students recently, and we took an example. You know, they are very fun about this fast fashion. And we said, okay, if you act with sense and responsibility, does it make sense to buy a pair of jeans for $20, knowing that it's been made all over the world, assembled in some countries, and the buttons from another one, and then it's sent to be bleached somewhere else in the world? In the meantime, you know that kids have picked up some of the material. It has no sense for you to get a $20 jean and to get 2, 3, 4, 5. That's what people do. And it is your responsibility as well to think about the whole value chain. That's quite new, because so far people think, okay, my act, my responsibility is just on what I do myself. Well, it's not. If we want to succeed, it's a collective effort. And we have the same governance with companies. As you know, we calculate our carbon footprint on our own account, what we do, and the energy that we use. But on top of that, now we are accountable for the so-called Scope 3, which is our clients and down the chain carbon footprint. And that's a big deal. Huh? For us, for example, in a bank like Société Générale, just to give you a sense, our own carbon footprint is about 220,000 tons CO2 per year. But the carbon footprint of our portfolio, only the corporate part, so when we lend to corporations, only that is maybe 120 million. So I said 220,000 tons for the whole Société Générale. And then just on one portion of our portfolio, our clients' CO2 is much, much bigger, 220 million tons. And we need to act on that collectively. So there is, for me, a kind of shift in paradigm, which is not easy for the pure liberal capitalist world where people were completely driven by the maximization of dividends and value. Now there is this wake-up call. We need to act quickly. We think that it is worth. We think we can do something together, but we have to take into account all the stakeholders. So for us, as a bank, it means that we want to play a role in the energy transition. You know, we have been a big financier of the energy world in general. So we have a lot of skills. So for the energy transition. So what we are doing now is pushing our people to be innovative, pushing them to engage, to set new standards. So we know it's not going to be like previous cycles of economy where industrials would make some research and development, then they would produce material, equipment, then somebody would call us to finance it, and so on and so forth. We don't have the time. So we put our skills, our intelligence together with our clients, industrials and so on, and other banks, but also the United Nations. And so this is a creation of alliance of different sorts, and I saw some of the screen, to make sure that people get as quick as possible from the idea to the finalization of the equipment and knowing it will be financeable because we are there and we give ideas on the structure. And on top of that, because this revolution is CapEx intensive, we put together as well the financing coming from funds, you know, infrastructure funds, or putting together some structures that we can issue on the market to get the global market to fund this new stuff. So it's a bit different. It means that when people were working in silos, now they work together in alliances. And the same applies within an organization. All the organizations are confronted with that. In a bank like ours, people are specialized most of the time on products. They are highly skilled on engineering some products. But what we see now is that we need to change that. So it's not like one client needs one product and I push it to him. It's one client is in a given sector. I need to understand what's going on with this sector in the coming years. And it's getting easy now because you have a lot of scenario, you know, international scenarios, what's going on with the decarbonation of the sector and so on. So we do have access to a lot of intelligence. We need to understand what's going on, but not only for the sector of the client, but for the whole value chain where it operates. And that means nobody can be there pushing one product to one client. You need to put the client on the table, analyze everything's going on in the sector, how we can help across the value chain and build together solutions. And that means for our staff, we need to change the rules, the motivation, the way that people are going to be objectivized, incentivized, you see? So it's a deep revolution, how we work outside of the bank, how we work inside of the bank. And I guess it's the same for everybody. And more than that, we need, I think, and I think it's the same with your corporations, we need to think how we are going to contribute to the awareness outside of our institution to enable the acceleration. Because you realize around us, for example, citizens, SMEs do not have the same level of information, and hence it will take time to create awareness. And we don't have time, as I said. I think we have this decade to really push it through. And so we are thinking how we can contribute to create awareness around us. That could be as simple as when I invent a training for my people, I need to make it available on replay to be able to push it outside of the bank and to prepare it in a way that is not really within our own world, that is understandable, so that I can give it to universities, to students to use it as MOOC, for example, use it for SMEs, and so on and so forth. So we are going to work right now on that. But more than that, creating awareness with solutions. So if I take the example of Citizen, today, so we are there to finance, companies are there to produce equipment and so on. The state is proposing quite a lot of interesting law at the moment, in our country at least, laws that will govern the way we eat, the way we get transportation, the way our housing is dealt, clothing, everything. And that was much needed. And that means that collectively we need to understand how a citizen will go from, in France we have about 10, we say we have 10 ton CO2 per person per year. And the Paris Agreement requires by 2050, 2 tons. So you see, 10 tons to 2 tons personal CO2 footprint. To do that, we have quite some ideas where we need to make some progress. So that's creating awareness. And as I said, the law is going to help us. The law will say, for example, that a supermarket must have 20% of its space dedicated to wholesale products, so that people can come with their container and buy without packaging. And a lot of things like that are being considered. And these laws have been created, interestingly, based on the work of 150 citizens. So we had a commission with 150 citizens sitting together and really thinking hard with the help of experts about how to change the world around us to activate the transition. They produced an interesting paper. Not everything was taken, of course, because you have arbitrage between the environmental matters, the social effect, political consequences. But a lot has been taken, and not only taken into consideration with respect, but included in legislation. And this is what we see now. So as a bank and as companies, we think that it's no more like on one side the companies, on the other side the politicians, and then the citizens. We, exactly as I described before with the industrials, we need to find a way to cooperate together, to push some ideas, and then maybe we could help people, as we do with major corporations on their transition path. Maybe we could help individual people understand how they are going to transition from 10 tons to 2 tons. That's a French example, but each country has its own. And for that, we can accompany them, including, for example, by proposing, instead of buying their car, thermal car that they have today, the day they want to replace it, maybe we can lease them some electrical vehicles. And the good thing about that is that in the end, by 2050, somewhere along the line, each family cannot have 1, 2, 3 cars as we have. Otherwise, it doesn't fit with the global equation. So if we change the habits and if ourselves, we promote new ways, new usage instead of ownership, circular economy instead of linear, then we can contribute. Then we are in line with our purpose, which is that we build together a better and sustainable world. So I think it's quite exciting. It's frightening for some people, but I think that if we understand, if we are aware, if we know, more or less, because there will be technological breakthrough, but if we know more or less what is the point we want to reach and which trajectory we can follow, then by becoming actors, I think people are going to be less stressed and the activity. But that means that we need to put ourselves on the long-term scale. And that's where I think that family businesses are the best place for that, because you're pragmatic, you are interested in the other stakeholders around you and in the society, if I may say so, much more than usual corporations. This long-term, this meaning that you have, the fact that you want to transmit something to the next generations, is completely in the DNA of this transition. Now, I know that in the region, you have different challenges. All the data I gave you are not at all relevant for the region. We, for example, in France, we were unlucky because we had no energy. And I remember as a kid, we had advertisement on television saying, in France, we have no petrol, no oil, but we have ideas. Okay. So because we had nothing from the earth, we developed carbon-free electricity like nuclear. We had to struggle and to develop things that today will benefit. but it's just a small part of the equation. We need to invent much more other things around. But each region will have its own. And we don't have enough time to talk hours, but I used to head the export finance business, so working for the developing countries. And I have to say that in this climate rush, I'm a bit concerned because many countries where we operate will need to have the development of hydrocarbon, they have new reserves of petroleum, of gas, and we need to accompany them. But we are under pressure of NGOs and a lot of different civil society stakeholders saying we should stop completely today. And so we need to fight to find a reasonable transition path. But we need to move along the path. Otherwise, we are all going to be in a very bad situation. So we need to take into consideration where is the starting point of a given country, of a given situation, be very clear and very serious on the path and get started. We cannot have the same to apply everywhere in the world. I know that, again, we have pressure to do that, but we cannot. We need to be pragmatic, but we need to be clear on what we want to do. And we cannot accept to arbitrate between social and environmental. And this is going to be, myself, with my position, is going to be my biggest challenge going forward. Because if you push electric cars, you have to know that electric cars have a cost much higher than the other ones. And so a lot of people cannot afford. If you say you are only going to finance housing with energy efficiency at a certain level, that means people need to pay for the works, to do quite a lot. Part will be subsidized, like renewing the windows and so on, putting some solar panels. Part will not be subsidized. And so some people will not be able to afford. New types of food, which is going to be from regenerative agriculture, bio, and whatever you have, will cost more than the things that sometimes you buy with the lower quality in the supermarket. So we need to be aware of that, and we need to build a society which is fair. Nobody should be left behind, and it's very, very tough to accomplish. Today in Europe, we had this situation where the gas prices have gone up, and all of a sudden, in a few months' time, many people cannot afford to pay when they heat the house, and it's a cold winter. So it's immediate. So this is the challenge. To wrap up, we need to be very quick. We need to act in this decade. I'm very positive that we can do something. And especially, I think you are very well placed to engage in some very concrete resolutions. But it's not that easy. It requires to work collectively in alliances. It requires to change the way we work internally, the governance and the objectives of the people. And it needs to have a kind of three to tango with the companies, the citizen, and the states. So some countries are already quite equipped, some are not. And without leaving aside anyone, as I said, because otherwise we'll have social drama, and it doesn't work. So, but it's, my own conclusion would be I'm quite positive again. I think that we have all the possibilities to stop the issue and to build a future that is more desirable, more sustainable for the next generations. But we need to be quick in getting aware and making sure that we all understand what's going on, I think.
Thank you, Hacina. Thank you very much, Hacina. I think that it was well said, but there is solution, the positive impact finance, the impact-based finance. There is so many words that we maybe can go deeper on this, on those terminology another time, because unfortunately we do not have so much time. But thank you again for your keynote about this important topic, and all the finance sector is active, very active. Thank you.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. So if we come back to what said Hacina, she said that for us at Société Générale, we also have something that is important for us. It's the collaboration. We believe, and we truly believe in this, that we need to collaborate. And this is why we host those kind of conversation with peers and partners. We think that in this fast moving world, we need to take the time to sit and to discuss and to see how we're going to make something happen together. And it's why I'm very happy, because we have this new partnership with Sarawat, with Women in Family Business, because Société Générale is also under its commitment of the United Nations Global Compact and the WEPs. I don't know if you know about the WEPs, which is the Women Empowerment Principles of the United Nations Women and the United Nations Global Compact. So we are leaders here in the region on this principle. So we do a lot of things around women empowerment. So we're really happy to do this thing with Women in Family Business. This means that Société Générale will be here for a couple of months with Sarawat. If you have questions, right, Farida? If you have questions, if you want to have conversation, if you want to know more about what is happening from the financial sector, please do not hesitate to reach Farida, and we will try to maybe put in place something to have experts and to answer your specific questions.
Thank you so much, Hanan. And truly, I mean, I think, you know, starting to close this fantastic session, the whole purpose really of our year 2022, coming back from what we have been through collectively, I think we're still kind of trying to mentally find a definition, I think, of what has been happening to us and how the future looks. But I think at Sarawat, we've decided we're going to dedicate much of our time this year to the big questions, you know, that are facing humanity, and, you know, everything that's with our physical world around us, you know, interpersonal relationships, questions of inclusion, questions of diversity. We really believe it is the year after everything that happened to ask those questions and to be honest with ourselves, and not just do them because they look nice. And I mean, they make for fantastic image material, but they are essential. They are essential to all our futures. And we love to do that with partners such as Société Générale, like the Rostamani Group, like a lot of other family businesses who've decided that they want to foster and support research and understanding into these questions, because that's really what we can do as a private sector. Basically, we have two roles, all of us here in the room. We are private individuals and we are actors in the private sector. And if we can create a clarity as to what our impact is on both of those levels, and we share that with each other, I honestly think that just with the people here in the room and online, you know, we can have an amazing impact. So I'd like to thank Hanan for making this possible today. I'd like to thank you all for checking in at an airport terminal and walking all the way over here. I'd like to thank our friends online for being here and asking amazing questions that I have not been able to answer all of them. And we hope to see you very soon in person, online, and across the next year. Thank you so much. Thanks.
Thank you.